Car shopping methods. The Souths outpaced the Norths in several consumption categories. During the year prior to our interview, they allocated 6 times more money for motor vehicles than the Norths, 72,000 versus 12,000. Dr. South also purchased a $65,000 Porsche during the year of our interview. Dr. South is, in fact, a true connoisseur of fine motor vehicles. He spends little time preparing a budget for his household and even less time planning for his financial future. But he has a very different orientation when it comes to purchasing automobiles. There is an inverse relationship between the time spent purchasing luxury items such as cars and clothes and the time spent planning one's financial future. High-income producing UAWs like Dr. South spend a great deal of their incomes on expensive automobiles and clothing, but it takes more than money to acquire and maintain large inventories of luxury goods. Such purchases have to be planned. It takes time to shop, and it takes time to care for large quantities of expensive, high-status artifacts. Time, energy, and money are finite resources, even among high-income generators. Our research indicates that even these top earners cannot have their cake and eat it too. Dr. North and PAWS in general, on the other hand, allocate their spare time to activities that they hope will enhance their wealth. Such activities include studying and planning their investment strategies and managing current investments. We will study this issue in greater detail later in this chapter. Conversely, UAWs such as Dr. South work hard to maintain and enhance their high standard of living. Often these high-income producing UAWs, Dr. South included, outspend their six-figure incomes. So how do they balance their need to maintain their high standard of living with finite income? Many aggressively shop for bargains. The South method. Examine the activities that Dr. South undertakes prior to purchasing an automobile. You might get the impression that he is a tightwad. Most UAWs, like Dr. South, bolster their hyperconsumption behavior by telling would-be critics that everything they buy is purchased near cost, at cost, below cost, and so on. And it is true that Dr. South is an aggressive bargain shopper, but he just paid more than $65,000 for an exotic sports car. Is this really a bargain? Dr. South made this purchase at near dealer's cost, but what were the costs of this so-called deal in time and effort? Most high-income generators, whether they are PAWs or UAWs, work more than 40 hours a week. Typically, the amount of time remaining each week is allocated in ways that are congruent with our goals. All too often, high-income producing UAWs spend countless hours studying the market, but not the stock market. They can tell you the names of the top auto dealers, but not the top investment advisors. They can tell you how to shop and spend, but they can't tell you how to invest. They know the styles, prices, and availability at various car dealers, but they know little or nothing about the various values of equity market offerings. As an example, contrast Dr. South's most recent automobile shopping activities with that of typical millionaires. On average, the American millionaire employs 4 to 5 simple bargain shopping techniques when buying a motor vehicle. Dr. South does it differently. He uses at least 9 bargain shopping tactics and strategies when negotiating with dealers. Consider the level of car purchasing knowledge Dr. South has recently acquired that will never pay capital gains or real dividends and enhance the productivity of his business. He now has knowledge about every Porsche dealer within a 400-mile radius of his home. Dr. South also can tell you immediately the dealer's costs on nearly every Porsche model, the cost of options and accessories, and performance characteristics of most models. It takes much time and effort to acquire such information. Dr. South has an interesting style when purchasing automobiles. He first decides on the make and model of the vehicle he wants and the corresponding accessories. Then he goes all out into information seeking and negotiation. It is not unusual for him to shop around for months for the very best deal. In the process, he usually discovers the dealer's cost on the vehicle. This is done prior to entering into serious negotiations with the dealer. Then he telephones all the dealers, his long list, and invites them to compete for his business. He has no problem buying a Porsche from the low price oriented out of town dealer. Those dealers who designate themselves as price oriented are then placed on Dr. South's short list. The others are dropped from consideration. Dealers on his short list are contacted once again. During this stage of the process, Dr. South quizzes the dealers about their willingness to sell at below cost. While doing so, he reminds them of the low prices quoted by other dealers. He also asks about program off-lease vehicles, but his heart is always set on a brand new model. At the end of the month, Dr. South recontacts all the low price oriented dealers. Dr. South does this because he feels that dealers have sales quotas and banknotes due at this time. He invites all these dealers to give their final lowest bid for his business. For his most recent purchase during the last day of the month, and after a flurry of phone calls, he finally accepted a bid from an out-of-town dealer. Dr. South is penny wise, pound foolish when purchasing motor vehicles, but he is convinced himself that he is a prudent buyer. After all, he spends much time and energy trying to buy cars at or near dealer cost, but perhaps dealer cost was too high a price to pay. It is difficult to accumulate wealth if you spend much of your time, energy, and money for a so-called dealer cost price on an extremely expensive motor vehicle. Consider this fact: most millionaires we have interviewed never in their lifetime spent near $65,000 for an automobile. In fact, as we will report in Chapter 4, more than half the millionaires we interviewed never paid more than $30,000 for a motor vehicle. Remember though, Dr. South is not a millionaire. Certainly in terms of net worth, millionaires are better able to afford a $65,000 automobile, but they ignore such opportunities. As so often is said, that's why they're millionaires. Certainly the consumption of very expensive automobiles has a dampening effect on the probability that one will ever accumulate significant wealth. During the year we interviewed him, Dr. South spent more than $70,000 for his most recent motor vehicle purchase, related sales tax, and insurance. Yet for the same period, how much did he place in his pension plan? About $5,700. In other words, only one out of every $125 of his income was set aside for retirement. The amount of time Dr. South took to find the best deal on his car was also counterproductive. We estimate that it took him more than 60 hours to study, negotiate, and purchase his Porsche. How much time and effort does it take someone to place money in a pension plan? A small fraction of his time and energy. It is easy for Dr. South to say he wants to accumulate wealth, but his actions speak much louder than his words. Perhaps that explains why he has lost a considerable amount of wealth through imprudent investing. Investing when one has little or no intellectual basis for one's decisions often translates into major losses. The North Method. Dr. North is not a connoisseur of motor vehicles. Although he is price sensitive when making purchasing decisions, we asked Dr. North about his most recent automobile purchase. Remember that Dr. South's most recent purchase was the current year's model. Note that fewer than 25% of America's millionaires are driving the current year's model. And of course, Dr. South is not a millionaire. Dr. North proudly informed us that he purchased his most recent automobile 6 years ago. We anticipate your question. Do you mean he has not purchased a new automobile in 6 years? Not only has Dr. North not purchased a new automobile in 6 years, but the one he purchased 6 years ago was a 3-year-old Mercedes-Benz 300 that he bought for $35,000. Dr. North loves the car. Great price, excellent fuel economy. It's a diesel. And of course, diesel Mercedes often can last hundreds of thousands of miles before they need an overhaul. It also has classic styling. How much time and energy did Dr. North expend in purchasing his Mercedes? Let's examine his decision-making process. First, he decided that he needed to replace his old car. After all, it was 20 years old. He knew that many European luxury automobiles depreciate rapidly during the first 3 years following their initial purchase. So he figured that he might be able to save a considerable amount if he purchased a 3-year-old Mercedes-Benz. He confirmed this speculation by determining the original price of the model he was interested in purchasing. A quick trip to a local dealer was all that was required to gain this knowledge. Dr. North then decided that his best choice would be a 3-year-old model. He telephoned a few dealers and advised them of his interest. He also examined several advertisements in the classified section of the paper. Finally, he decided on a low mileage model offered by a local dealer. As he explained, automobiles, I have always placed a premium on quality, but I never lease, never finance. I drive a Mercedes-Benz. Since I started my practice, I have only had 2 cars. The first, a Mercedes, I purchased new after I opened my practice, kept it 20 years. Then I bought my second car, a 3-year-old Mercedes. I went to a dealer. He wanted to sell me a new one, but it was $20,000 more than the used one on the lot. Then I asked myself a simple question. Is the pride of new ownership, and that's all it is, pride, worth $20,000? The cars are the same. The answer is no. The pride of new car ownership is not worth $20,000. The North method took only a few hours. Contrast this with Dr. South's automobile purchasing crusade, a process that took him at least 60 hours. And of course, Dr. North likes to keep his car for a long time, so his allocation of purchasing time is spread over several years. On average, he devotes less than an hour a year to purchasing motor vehicles, but Dr. South likes to buy a new car every year. Thus, his 60-hour project is typically allocated only 1 year. Fears and worries. What do you spend time worrying about? Are your concerns congruent with wealth accumulation, or do you spend time thinking about issues that are impediments to becoming affluent? How do PAWs and UAWs differ in regard to their fears and concerns? In simple terms, UAWs worry more than PAWs. PAWs and UAWs are also worry about different issues. Overall, PAWs has significantly fewer concerns and fears than their counterparts. What if you spend much of your time thinking about a lot of issues that concern you? You will spend less time taking action to solve these problems. And what if your fears provide a foundation for increased spending? You may be a member of the UAW group. Fears and concerns can be both a cause for becoming a UAW as well as a result. Will a person who constantly worries about earning more money to enhance his lifestyle become wealthy? Probably not. Dr. South is not wealthy, in part because he concerns himself with such issues. Dr. North is wealthy today because he placed much less priority on standard of living issues than did Dr. South. Dr. South told us that 19 issues were of high or moderate concern to him. Dr. North was concerned with only about 7 issues. Thus, it's logical to conclude that the Dr. Norths of this country have more time and energy to devote to wealth-enhancing activities. Let's examine how these doctors' fears and worries, or lack of them, have affected their lives. The children of UAWs and PAWs. The Souths have 4 children. 2 are adult. Dr. South has serious, well-founded concerns about their future. UAWs tend to produce children who eventually become UAWs themselves. What is expected of children who are exposed to a household environment predicated upon very high consumption? Few, if any, economic constraints, little planning or budgeting, no discipline, and pandering to every product-related desire. Like their UAW parents, as adults, these children are often addicted to an undisciplined, high-consumption lifestyle. Further, these children typically will never earn the incomes necessary to support the lifestyle to which they have grown accustomed. Certainly, Dr. South's parents' indulgent lifestyle contributed to his becoming a UAW. And he learned so well. His lifestyle is even more consumption-oriented than that of his mother and father. His upper middle class lifestyle was never interrupted, even when he was in graduate school and medical school. His parents paid for his home and all other expenses. They provided him with substantial gifts of cash each year. In essence, he never really had to change his consumption habits or standard of living after leaving home. Fortunately for him, he has the income to support his addiction to consumption. But what about his children? They have lived in a high consumption environment that would be extremely difficult to replicate on their own. The curtain is coming down on the 3rd generation. Dr. South indicated in our interviews with us that he believes his children would never generate even a fraction of the income he currently earns. In comparison, Dr. North's adult children are demonstrating more independence and discipline, in part because they have been exposed to a much more frugal, well planned, and disciplined lifestyle. As we noted, the Norths consume at a level that is more congruent with a household earning less than one-third of their income. This living below their means is precisely why PAWs throughout the income spectrum tend to produce children who are economically disciplined and self sufficient adults. PAWs tend to produce children who become PAWs. Dr. South, as indicated, has accumulated considerably less wealth than Dr. North. He is significantly less able than Dr. North to support the economic outpatient care of his adult children. But ironically, it is Dr. South who is burdened by having economically dependent adult children. We question both Dr. South and Dr. North about their fears and worries concerning their children. As you may have already predicted, Dr. South is much more concerned about his issue. He specifically expressed fears of, number one, having adult children who think his wealth is their income. Number two, having to support his adult children financially. Imagine how disconcerting it is for someone like Dr. South to face the prospect of supporting his extended family. Chapters 5 and 6 will explore the implications of economic outpatient care in great detail. However, there is an important point to note at this time. Having adult children who are UAWs greatly reduces the probability that their parents will ever become wealthy. Dr. South wonders where his children got the idea that their parents would provide them with substantial economic outpatient care. He worries that he will not have the resources to provide his children with all the subsidies his parents gave him. Yet, there is yet another fear Dr. South must face. He is becoming more and more worried that his children will not get along with each other. Much of his concern is rooted in their need for economic support from their parents. Dr. North does not worry about such issues. We asked both doctors about these types of concerns. Dr. South worried that, number three, his family children will fight over his estate. Number four, he will be accused of financially favoring one adult child over another. Are Dr. South's fears justified? Ask yourself this question. What is the greatest fear of the 30-year-old sons and daughters of the Dr. Souths of America? That the economic outpatient care they receive from their parents will stop? Many 30-something UAWs cannot maintain anywhere near the lifestyle they had while living with mom and dad. In fact, many are unable to purchase even a modest home without financial subsidies from their parents. It is not unusual for these rich kids to receive substantial cash and other financial gifts until they are in their late 40s and even early 50s. Often these adult UAWs compete with each other for their parents' wealth. What would you do if your economic subsidy was being threatened by the presence of your equally dependent brothers and sisters? Dr. South is not worried about his problems. He is also worried about his children's problems. Consider for a moment the legacy he is leaving them. What are the ramifications of being an economically dependent adult? How much insecurity and fear will they have to deal with in the future? How will they be able to have harmonious, loving relationships with each other? These are among the issues Dr. South spends more and more time contemplating. Dr. North is much more concerned with such problems. His adult children are accustomed to living in a much more frugal and disciplined environment. They are less likely to have a perceived need for major doses of economic outpatient care. Taxes, government, and government. Many high-income earners in America, both PAWs and UAWs, are greatly concerned about the actions of the federal government. These actions are external forces, those over which an individual has no control. Dr. South indicated that he feared 4 external forces that are government-related. Interestingly, these issues are not a major concern to Dr. North. Let's look at these 4 concerns. Number 1, paying increasingly high federal income taxes. Both physicians think that the federal government is likely to require high-income producers to pay more in taxes, but tax increases are more the concern of Dr. South than of Dr. North. Why is Dr. South concerned about this issue? because he needs to maximize his realized income to support his hyper-consumption lifestyle. If the government requires Dr. South to pay a higher share of his income, his lifestyle will be threatened. What about Dr. North? He told us that he had a low level of concern over the prospects of the federal government increasing the share of his realized income that he must pay in taxes. Last year, Dr. North paid approximately $277,000 in income taxes. This may seem like a big bite, but look at it through the eyes of Dr. North. He looks at income tax more as a portion of his total wealth than a portion of his realized income. What if the government doubled the tax rate on high incomes? This is very unlikely, but just as an example, Dr. North would then have to pay equivalent of 8% of his wealth each year. By comparison, Dr. South would be at a wealth rate of 150%. Is it any wonder that Dr. North is much less concerned about paying increasingly higher federal income taxes than Dr. South is? Table 3.3, income and wealth contrast. That is so interesting. Number 2, increased government spending and the federal deficit. Dr. South is very concerned about this issue. He believes that increased spending on the part of the government will translate into higher taxes of his income. Dr. North is not overly concerned for the reasons stated above. Number 3, a high rate of inflation. Dr. South is also concerned that the government action has increased spending and an increase in the deficit will precipitate a significant increase in the inflation rate. Dr. South has a moderate level of concern about this issue because he, like many UAWs, keeps trading up to more and more expensive homes, cars, clothes, and so on. On the other hand, Dr. North feels that inflation will significantly increase the value of at least part of his investment portfolio. Number 4, increased government regulation of business and industry. Most physicians feel that this type of government action is targeted at them. They interpret increases in government regulation as preceding the advent of socialized Medicare. Both physicians feel that this would have a dampening effect on the fees they generate for their professional services. Dr. South indicated that this issue is of significant concern to him, while Dr. North viewed such actions as only a minor concern. Why do these two respondents perceive things so differently? The actions of the government are often a threat to high-income earners who use most of their incomes to support their lifestyle. This is especially true when there is political gain for those in power in targeting the wealthy. Actually, the people the politicians are targeting are high-income earners. Most politicians don't understand the difference between having a high income and having high levels of wealth. They have a more difficult time targeting people with high income, with high levels of net worth. Most millionaires who are PAWs are self-employed. Being self-employed gives one much more control over one's economic future than does working for others. Conversely, employees today, even high income producing executives, have less control over their livelihoods than ever before. Downsizing, for example, is taking its toll even among the most productive employees. More often than not, even high income producing employees are not likely to be millionaires. UAWs who are employees, not self-employed, are particularly vulnerable to external forces that threaten their ability to earn a living. We found that only 19% of PAWs versus 36% of high-income producing non-millionaires, UAWs, were concerned about having their jobs eliminated. But in spite of the handwriting that is often on the wall, even most high-income earning employees are consumption-oriented. Financial goals, words versus deeds. Many high-income producing PAWs and UAWs share similarly stated goals concerning wealth accumulation. For example, more than 3/4 of both groups indicated that they had the following goals: to become wealthy by the time they retire, to increase their wealth, to become wealthy through capital appreciation, to build their capital while conserving the value of their assets. But having a set of stated goals does not necessarily mean that one is committed to achieving them. Most of us want to be wealthy, but most of us do not spend the time, energy, and money to required to enhance our chances of realizing this goal. Time allocation. Most PAWs agree with the following statement. While most UAWs disagree, I spend a lot of time planning my financial future. Usually, I have sufficient time to handle my investments properly. When it comes to allocation of my time, I place the management of my own assets before my other activities. Interesting table here. Man. Conversely, UAWs tend to agree with the following statements. I can't devote enough time to my investment decisions. I'm just too busy to spend much time with my own financial affairs. PAWs and UAWs are often in the amount of time they actually allocate to planning their investments. Planning is typically found to be a strong habit among people who have a demonstrated propensity to accumulate wealth. Planning and wealth accumulation are significant correlates even among investors with modest incomes. In our survey of 854 middle income respondents, for example, a strong positive correlation was found between investment planning and wealth accumulation. One of the more interesting findings in our studies of the affluent relates to why many people spend so little time planning their investments. Many people who do little or no investment planning often feel the way these respondents did. It's hopeless. I never have the time needed to make it pay off. We never have made so much, but the more we earn, the less we seem to accumulate. Our careers take up all our time. I don't have 20 hours a week to fool with investing my money. But PAWs do not spend anywhere near 20 hours a week in this way. If you study Table 3.5, you will notice that on average, even prodigious accumulators of wealth do not need to devote a large proportion of their time to planning their investment strategies. Wow, 8.4 hours per month. Interesting. I think I do more than that. Yay me. We found that these middle income PAWs spend an average of 8.4 hours per month planning their investments. This translates to about 100.8 hours per year. Given that there are 8,760 hours in a year, PAWs allocate approximately 1.2% of their time planning their investments. UAWs on average spend 4.6 hours per month planning their investments, or about 55.2 hours per year. In other words, PAWs spend an average of 83% more hours, 100 versus 55, planning their per month than the UAWs. UAWs allocate only 1 in 160 hours of their total available time to planning their investments. PAWs allocate 1 in 87 hours. Will UAWs automatically become PAWs simply by doubling the number of hours they devote to planning their investments? Not likely. Planning is only one of the many key ingredients in building wealth. Most PAWs have a regimented planning schedule. Each week, each month, each year, they plan their investments. They also start planning at a much earlier age than do UAWs. UAWs, on the other hand, are much like some overweight people who occasionally starve themselves to reach their ideal weight. But more often than not, they regain all the weight they lost and more. UAWs may start the new year with a plan that outlines a variety of investment goals. These goals may be the product of a couple days of aggressive planning that specifies the number of dollars allocated to investment. Also included in the plan may be significant cold turkey reduction in the consumption of goods and services. More often than not, this shock planning and corresponding radical change in lifestyle are so severe that they do not work. The typical UAW in this case quickly becomes disenchanted with his new model for wealth building. Soon he falls off the wagon once again, breaking his promise of planning, investing more, and consuming less. Many UAWs think that a professionally prepared plan will make them PAWs overnight, but even the best financial plans are ineffective if you don't follow them. All too often, UAWs think that others can lose weight for them. The UAWs in such cases would greatly benefit from understanding how PAWs operate. Pause do a little planning each and every month. Again, only about 8 hours a month. UAWs might do more planning if they knew that it would not require them to quit their day jobs. Pause, build wealth slowly. They do not live in a Spartan existence, but they do have a regimen when it comes to balancing working, planning, investing, and consuming.